as we're given another quadratic equation, quadratic because it has the x squared. Notice we can't take a square root because we still have an x term. We can't just add 7 over because it has an x term, so we can't just use inverse operations. Now it looks strange because when we want to try factoring it, we can't do our product of binomials. Well, try to think of it some of our earlier techniques. I have a greatest common factor here. X times x minus 7. We're trying to distribute. X times x gives me the x squared. X times negative 7 gives me that negative 7x. But notice what I have is a binomial times an x. Our terms are still here. Our same idea about changing signs. Okay, sweet. X equals 7. That's a pretty apparent answer. And look back when we check it. 7 squared is 49. 7 times 7 is 49. 49 minus 49, that's 0. It checks out. There's one of my answers. But what to do about that x alone? A equals 0, B equals 0. Remember that we just set each of those equal to 0. And look at how apparent that is when we look back at it now. 0 squared is 0. 7 times 0 is 0. 0 minus 0 is 0. That's almost an answer that could have stepped out right away. Whenever we have no constant, 0 will always be a solution because there's nothing to change our number at the end. 0 will just make everything else cancel out. So keep that in mind as you're working through some of these problems. Separate your answers with a comma. A problem that may look very similar. When we see this, we may want to say, okay, we'll factor out that x. But notice the problem is we don't have a product property of negative 16. It needs to be a 0. If two numbers multiply to be 0, one or both is 0. If two numbers multiply to be negative 16, then one or both are not necessarily negative 16. The first thing we need to do, we need to make one side be 0. Add 16 to each side. X squared minus 8x plus 16 equals 0. And now at this point is when we're able to factor. And now that we have a constant again, it will be my product of binomials. X and x gives me that x squared. To get a positive 16, they need to be the same sign. To be a minus 8, they both need to be negative. But notice again, we could make a table if we need. 4 and 4. Now, something that should creep into the back of our mind, that should be x minus 4 squared if we wanted to fully simplify it. But we aren't trying to fully simplify here. We're trying to solve. We're trying to figure out what works for x. Well, just like before, once I have my binomials, change the sign. X equals 4 and x equals 4 again. But we don't want to list it twice. Either 4 works or it doesn't. We don't want to list it twice. When we go back up and look at 4, 4 squared is 16. 8 times 4 is 32. 16 minus 32, negative 16. My answer now is just the one single 4 because that's what works. Sometimes I have 2 answers, sometimes I have 1. This has a name later. We're going to call it a double root, but it's not important to us with what we want to look at it for now. When we're told to solve, all we want to find is what works. 4 is what works.